Well, we all need something to blame, Bill.
Good evening. We have a quorum established. We will now begin with the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know. I was like, Roxy. We will begin our comments by beginning with you, Dr. Burns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, I'd like to begin this evening by thanking the organizers and participants of our 18th annual Extreme Beginnings College and Career Expo. More than 800 high school students attended this year to explore their options after graduation and to gain practical tips on applying for jobs and to colleges. Representatives from North Carolina State University, Shaw University, William Peace University, the East Carolina University College of Nursing, and others were on hand to answer questions about the admissions process and college life. Companies present ranged from SAS to the Raleigh Fire Department to American Airlines, all present to show students the wide array of career opportunities that await them after graduation from either high school or college. Some of the seniors even got to interview for jobs right on site at McKimmon Center. In all, there were about 250 organizations represented. There were a number of useful workshops, including a mock interview room, advice on crafting a resume, and a popular session that helped students understand how poor choices made online could derail college or career prospects. As you know, we're working every day toward our strategic plan goal of annually graduating at least 95% of our students ready for productive citizenship as well as college or career. Much of that preparation takes place in the classroom as students accumulate the knowledge and skills they'll need to succeed. Events like this show that we're also there helping students when the rubber meets the road, ensuring that they have the practical tools needed to make a smooth transition after graduation. Every sixth grader in our district next year will be able to build their own art-making robot, thanks to the generosity of Lenovo. Yesterday, about 160 students from 13 different middle schools joined 200 Lenovo volunteers to assemble almost 14,000 ArtBot kits for next year's sixth graders. ArtBots can be programmed to create any number of drawings and are a fun introduction to basic robotics concepts. Monday's event was part of Lenovo's annual Day of Service. We're fortunate that Lenovo often sends a team of employee volunteers our way to support students and our schools. Increasing community engagement is a key component of our strategic plan, and I'm grateful to the folks at Lenovo for their example and their consistent willingness to serve. And finally, I'd like to take just a moment to express how honored I was to participate in the Surprise Patrol on March 27th, where we had the opportunity to inform 13 of our most outstanding teachers that they had been selected as Teacher of the Year finalists for Wake County Public Schools. I particularly enjoyed the students' enthusiastic reactions. There were spouses and family members present who often joined into the surprise. It was a great day all around. The most rewarding part of all, of course, was the reaction of the deserving teachers. They were grateful, they were overjoyed, and perhaps even a bit overwhelmed by the moment. All of our teachers give their all every day to make an impact on the lives of Wake County children. And we don't get to say often enough just how much their work means and how much they are appreciated individually. On that day, we did, and I was privileged to be a part of it. So please allow me to close by urging you to take a moment this week to express your gratitude to teachers past and present who've made a difference in your life or the lives of children. I can tell you it will mean as much to you as it will to them. Madam Chair, members of the board, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Every year I want to be on the prize patrol. And I've absolutely enjoyed watching people, regardless of our digital footprint, talk about the impact that teachers have had on their lives. And I'm not even an educator, but I've enjoyed what people say about the people who've impacted their lives and thanking their current teachers and educators. So please, if our board members haven't engaged, perhaps we should all engage as well. I think we often uplift each other when we are reminded of why we all do what we do and see it through someone else's eyes. And I do not have any comments this evening, so Mr. Fletcher, I'm going to begin with you.
Given the topic we have discussed presented to us later tonight relative to school finance and how we support the quality programs in our school district, I'll pass.
I just want to say that I've done most of my PTA visits for my district, and it's been very enlightening. And the one thing I have a real positive thing to talk about too, but I also want to say on the PTA boards, one of the things that came to my attention mostly that came up at every PTA meeting that I went to in my district was the fact that they had open work orders and a lot of maintenance to be done at every school. And I know we have a lack of funding for maintenance and our cleaning, and I think somehow as a board, I'm hoping that we can talk about how a lot of parents said that they had offered to clean on weekends or after hours and had been said maybe they couldn't, or they could get partnerships to help with maintenance, and they said maybe they couldn't because they were told they couldn't. So I'm thinking as a board we need to look at that and see what we can do if we don't have the funding for more maintenance in our schools and all the at least 35 work orders per school in my district. We need to talk about as a full board what we can do with our community to try to work in our schools. One of the real positive things that happened, I went to the Ligon Food Arc, and Greta Dula is amazing. She's just passionate, and she's lovely, and everybody there, communities and schools representation, and there was just so much going on there, and the kids from both from Inlow and Ligon that were representing together, there was a big turnout for this event, and I was really happy to be a part of that. So again, our food arcs and our pantries in our schools, are being very well utilized. A good partnership. That's it.
I just want to share that on Monday, the 16th of April, will be my next BAC meeting. Not my last, but my next. And that'll be at 6 p.m. at Apex High School at the Green Level campus. And we'll be talking about school construction. And at 6 p.m. we'll be getting a tour of the new facility, which will be Green Level High School. Dr. Kearney and her staff have been gracious to organize that. My last BAC for the year is scheduled for May 7th. And I have a community chat coming up Thursday, April 19th at 10 a.m. at Eva Perry Library in the conference room. So thank you.
I'd like to thank my colleagues for their support or district support in allowing me and Mr. Sutton to attend the National School Board Association's conference in San Antonio, Texas. It was just exhilarating to spend 4 days with educators who are committed to public education. That's all we talked about, was public education and how can we make it better and what can we do for the students in each of our districts. And I was absolutely amazed that I was not able to talk to many superintendents or board members who were anywhere near the size of Wake County Public Schools. The smallest was, I was at a table with Southwest Alaska, and there were 3 board members there from villages, 1 board member per village, and their school system that they represented was K-12. The smallest was 20 students, and the largest was 195. But they had the same concerns that we have in our 163,000 student district. But it was a great conference, and I'm grateful that I was able to attend. I have coming up on the 19th, which is a week from Thursday, my next Cafe Chat, which will be at Maud's Garden. A great opportunity to share ideas and get questions answered. So I'm looking forward to spending time with our families in District 7. Thank you.
Mr. Agee.
This will be East Wake Middle School continued. During the board meeting of March 20, this subject was discussed and voted on, but there is so much more to the issue. During that meeting, we heard that this is a substandard, dilapidated building. To this, I strongly disagree. Policy was in place requiring high-quality, long, 40-year life cycle facilities that followed the joint Wake County Public Schools and Wake County Facility Guidelines. I reviewed and used those documents. The 40-year life cycle was understood to mean that capital-funded facilities operations would not be working on that facility till at least that time, not the definition that's currently being used. Those facility policies were the backbone to promoting those very early bonds that built East Wake Middle, 5 elementary schools, and provided air conditioning in all facilities. Many years of following these policies and practicing good construction protocol and strict compliance with all bidding and contracting laws, the best life cycle building was provided. I clearly state that that is what was done. I have written and edited many facility specifications and did inspecting of most of the facilities, and I've seen the facilities built and used from cradle to grave. And I truly tell everyone, East Wake Middle School is not ready for the grave. It is this board and the Wake County Commissioner's duty to stand for the policies and promises made years ago. This board is supposed to uphold those policies, just as we are to uphold the oath of office we pledged upon becoming members of this board. Not of a newly created Board of Education, not of this board or that board, but the only Wake County Board of Education defined by its policies. The premise that the East Wake Middle School is a falling down, dilapidated facility is completely false and should have been rejected by this board 8 years ago, just on the knowledge of the age. There are far too many discussions about building age to discuss here, but this is wanting it to have things both ways. The facility assessment document is tragically flawed. Although references were made to architects and engineers, nowhere on this document is an official stamp, seal, signature, or any other identification of the author so we can ask that person questions. Also, only 2 pages of the many questioner pages were completed. This was a misapplied, wildly falsified use of this facility assessment document. Although this board did vote at the last meeting to proceed with the demolition plan, there are many more milestones in this process to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to also send out thanks to the Junior League of Raleigh, who invited me and included me on a Women in Public Service panel. I was there with Commissioner Chair Jessica Holmes, and it was great to be with young women who were being encouraged to enter into public service and public leadership. Also was very pleased to participate with Mr. Sutton at NC State's School of Social Work's Spring Summit for 2018, and was able to be on a panel where Darlene Johnson and some of our social workers were both on the panel and in the audience to discuss how we can support students and how our schools can support families out in our community. I thank them for that work. It was also great to be at the Boys and Girls Club Outstanding Youth Lunch with Ms. Hartenstein. We were really inspired by a lot of the students and their stories. And the key that the Boys Club leader I talked with said that these students have a sense of belonging in their club. And it helps them connect to school. And when they're not feeling that sense of belonging in school, they're getting it from the Boys and Girls Club. So I really challenge us to find ways that we can make sure our students do have these community connections, but that they should feel that connection in our schools as well. Also was with Ms. Moore and others with 600 students, more than 600 students from 30 school systems for the North Carolina Hispanic Education Summit. That's hosted every year by NC State, and also a great way to lift students up and really connect them to the importance of staying and graduating from a high school and highlighting their skills along lines of extreme beginnings to try to make sure that they're connecting with skills that they need once they graduate. And the District 6 BAC Board Advisory Council will be meeting at Stow Elementary School at noon this Friday. And we've got Russ Smith coming to talk about school safety, as well as Glenn Carrozza talking about student assignments. So we'll be the guinea pigs for Mr. Carrozza's presentation coming up. And that's April 13th at noon. Thanks.
So either we've been very busy. It's been a long time since we last met. I got a lot of stuff going on. Don't know which one it is, but anyway. On March 23rd, I had the opportunity to speak to the class, I think it was 23 and class 24 principal fellows, and talk to these aspiring principals about local advocacy and how to advocate to their board members and others as a principal and the role of a principal in local advocacy. Then on March 24th, I had the opportunity to share with some of our students that are members of the National Achiever Society, which the National Achiever Society is a honor society for students of color throughout Wake County Public Schools, and they had their first achievement conference, and so I was able to share with them out at Heritage High on Saturday morning, the 24th. After that, was fortunate to participate and tape the Education Matters show, and was fortunate to also been, I think, 2 weeks in a row, or have two out of 3 weeks, along with Chair Monica Johnson-Hostler. And so Wake County was featured 2 or 3 weeks on Education Matters. And so we were front and center there talking about some of the issues that we're facing as a district. Was also honored to introduce our chair as a keynote speaker at the John Chavis Legacy Awards here at Martin Street Baptist Church a couple of weeks ago. The Chavis Awards recognized the work of John Chavis, who was an educator and preacher and teacher in Southeast Raleigh years ago. And so our chair was the keynote speaker for that event. And then last, but certainly not least, is Ms. Hartenstein said we both were honored to participate in the National School Boards Conference in San Antonio. And we didn't do a thing. We just hung out and partied and drank till wee hours of the morning and didn't. No, I'm just kidding. I'm playing. No, it was a wonderful conference, as she's. Wonderful conference, as she said, with thousands of school board members from across the country, again, grappling with many of the issues from school safety to equity that many boards from all different sizes and districts are facing. So it was a wonderful 3-4 day trip to really kind of become energized and meet and connect with other school board members and superintendents from around the country, and brought a lot of good information back to that I think will help us deliberate as a board on many key issues, as well. So look forward to sharing that with all of you all over the coming weeks and months ahead. So thank you.
Thank you. I, too, had a great opportunity to talk with a bunch of principal fellows. This was a class at North Carolina Central. About two-thirds of them were Wake County public school teachers who are looking to be principal fellows. Just a very inspiring time talking to them about interacting with boards and policy, and really encouraging school leadership to develop passion, because the development of passion in schools is the best way to get exciting leadership, kids excited about learning. Had another great opportunity to teach a class in the College of Education at NC State on STEM education. Again, largely teachers, some lateral entry folks looking to pursue higher ed. Yeah, it's a great conversation with them. Finally, I feel it's important, based on some conversations with several of my constituents asking me about about a lot of issues around privilege, which has been in the news a lot lately. And I just want to reflect that too often in some of that dialogue, privilege has been used as a club or aspect of guilt. And I want to say that privilege is something that we in education are about the creation of. We should be creating the privilege to go into a setting and be welcomed. We should be creating the settings where it is a privilege to be judged by the content of your character. We should be creating the settings where the privilege is welcome, is the same for every person. Privilege only becomes a problem when I try to exclude my privilege from you. And so I'd love us to in some of this discussion, when you hear stuff in the news, try not to use privilege as a club, but look at privilege to be that thing that we create and offer to everyone. And I think if we do that, we're going to see a much better society than some of what we currently are dealing with. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Cash.
I just want to mention that I do have a back on Monday, the 16th. But I want to highlight that Dr. Burns will be there speaking. And since I have some of my favorite West Millbrook people here with PTAs, I invite you to bring 100 friends and come. Okay? Thanks.
I do see some of your favorite West Millbrook parents that were some of my favorite Northridge parents. Thank you. Great to see me.
And there are bailiwick friends there, too.
Great to see smiling faces that you know, often sitting from this angle. I will now ask for a motion to approve our agenda for this evening.
Move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We'll now begin with public comment. Citizens who sign up to address the board during public comment will be called on in priority order. First, bless you. First for items on the agenda and then for items not on the agenda. Each individual speaker will be allowed 3 minutes for remarks. Specific personnel or student matters are not appropriate for this public comment setting, but may be addressed through applicable WCPSS personnel, the grievance policy, or other applicable policies. It is actually my privilege to introduce our first speaker tonight, Ms. Christy Moore from NCAE, who will be presenting one of our newest Wake County teachers an award.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Superintendent. I am Christy Moore. I am the Vice President of the North Carolina Associations of Educators, and I am a public school teacher in Durham. So I am so happy to be before you today. It is my honor to stand before you and present Nashonda Cook with the K-Troll Award for Outstanding Professional Educators. Nashonda is an accomplished instructional leader who cares about her students and the working and learning conditions of her school community. She is an NBCT in special education field and serves as the North Carolina Association of Educators NBCT Caucus Chair, created by by members of the association. She also was a director of the Men of Honor and helped create the program for boys of color in Durham as well. She has supported many programs such as Teach Up, North Carolina Teaching Fellows, SNCAE, which is our student chapters, and North Carolina Teacher Cadet. She is also in many organizations: Council of Exceptional Children, Center for Teacher Quality, Women's Advance, Moms Rising. She is the mother of 2 amazing young girls, one a teenager, so please pray. She believes wholeheartedly in public education, and we are honored. Not only am I honored to give it to the educator, Nashonda Cook, but my dear friend, Ms. Nashonda Cook. Congratulations.
I would just like to say thank you. She mentioned my career in Durham. I was with Durham for a long time, but I'm here in Wake, and I'm so thrilled to be at Carroll Middle Magnet School with a wonderful, wonderful principal, Elizabeth McWilliams, who has allowed me to continue the work that I did in Durham. She's allowed me to continue it here in Wake, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Continue with my personal point of privilege. I do think I said this to you as well. It is my honor to have you in Wake County. I was able to watch your work from Durham because we're connected to most of the other same organizations, advocacy organizations outside of education as well. And so we are glad to have you, and I'm glad to have your principal with us this evening as well. Thank you for joining us and supporting your teachers and the great work that I get the privilege to watch, the advocacy that's coming out of Carroll Middle School, and I'm glad you're here joining us at Wake County. Congratulations. And congratulations to your young daughters, who I also know are completely supportive of the ways that you give to our students above and beyond your classroom. So thank you, and thank you for joining us this evening. I will add to taking point of privilege, Dr. Martin, that one of the things about privilege is there's a lot of privileges that are actually can be used for good. And so sitting in this seat, there's some authoritative privilege that I use that was used for good. That's all right. So thank you all for indulging me too as well, to my board members and those of you who've joined us this evening. Our next speaker is Jocelyn McGinnis Hickney from West Millbrook Middle.
Good evening. My name is Jocelyn McGinnis Hickey. I have 2 kids at West Millbrook Middle School. And first, the last time I was here was when you all approved implementing the IB program at West Millbrook, and we are so excited about it, and we're so thankful for that. So thank you. But we do have some real problems at West Millbrook that desperately need to be addressed in order for our students to thrive there. We have excellent teachers who are supported by a wonderful administration, but our physical space is falling apart. I don't know if you all can see my teacher, but 1976, I think that falls under the 40-year
it's officially 42 years old.
There.
You're younger than me.
Our buildings are old. 3 minutes is not going to be enough time to cover everything that is going on there, but I'll give you some examples. We have our 6th, 7th grade and gym buildings have chronic sewage backflow problems from hallway drains since before 2012. The 6th grade has been relocated twice this year already because of sewage coming up through the hallway drains in the floors of the hallways. The problem can't be fixed. Not unless you can figure out how to lift the entire buildings up, because the problems stem from a gravity-fed sewage system where once the school's buildings are so old, the foundations have sunk and they're lower than where the drains are that have to get fed into. So we have no way to fix that. We just have to keep moving the kids around every time someone flushes the wrong toilet. Our HVAC is failing. The entire 7th grade was displaced from their classrooms for 2 weeks due to no heat last year. We have one science class was out of their room from November to February. During EOGs last year, we had heat hot water pipe burst in the 6th grade building and set off the fire alarms. The kids had to start their tests over again. That's something that happens with frequency. We have an entire area near our 6th grade building and library. We have an open campus, so the kids go outside to change for every class. And when it rains, they have whole areas that have to get marked off. And when you're a 6th grader trying to make it to Senora Stace's Spanish class in 4 minutes, like my daughter does, it's very stressful when you have to change your route and go all the way around the long way. We have a 7th grade teacher that wears a coat in May, another classroom that has no ductwork coming into their classroom at all. Our main office gets to 90 degrees in the winter, and we're told the fix is to put ice on one of the thermostats to try to keep the heat from coming on. There are lots and lots of examples that I could give you, but the point is that our school is very, very old. Our youngest building, our baby, is the 8th grade building, and it's 30 this year. And so, the kids and the teachers and the staff have become accustomed to having to shuffle around when all of these disruptions happen, but they are disrupted from their classroom time very frequently. We even have buildings that smell like urine, and or where you get 200 building, I get a headache every time I walk in there. And so these are some things that we hope that you will consider when we make our plea for us to get moved up the list for our rebuilds.
Thank you. So, yes, the timer isn't working, but don't worry, staff is going to alert me. Okay. So for our next speakers, who I know you'll just carry on the theme that you are wrapping up. Yes. So I will call our next speaker, who will pick up where you left off.
Thank you very much.
Christine Grantham.
Good evening. My name is Christine Grantham, and I have the privilege of serving as the PTA president this year at West Millbrook Magnet. Thank you very much. Middle school. I have 2 daughters there, an 8th grader and a 6th grader, and I come from Northridge, and we had looked forward to attending West Millbrook as long as I was there. And while we were there at Northridge, we were anticipating that we would have a new West Millbrook by the time my now 8th grader was enrolled in 6th grade. We are here tonight to ask for your help in fixing a problem that predates your service on this board. We do need a new school, and we have since at least 2011, according to Wake County Public Schools. But we do keep getting overlooked, and we're moved down this renovation list. We trusted in this system and that our renovation was coming. Money ran out. Bond issues were around, but we believed that it would happen. But we've been too understanding, and we need action now, and we need your help. So I'm asking you to make our renovation a priority and advance it by years, because we can't wait until 2023. I'd like to give you some background on how we got here, the history. As far as I know, in 2011 and 2012 is when our first meetings took place, and we had community input. Plans were developed, and we were at the top of the list. And somewhere something happened, and overnight, it seemed, we went from number 4 on the list to number 15. And we don't know where. I would love to get a better understanding of that. In 2015, we went through that entire design process and input process again, because the 2012 plans were outdated and no longer useful. Super design narrative plans moved forward, and in early 2016, the board actioned a tear down and a rebuild on a flip side of West Millbrook Middle School. Since then, we've been moved to 2018, 2020, and now we sit at 2023. Looking at the map of active and planned projects on the Wake County Public School System website, in addition to the named projects that are listed, West Millbrook Middle renovation now sits below 2 as yet to be named and determined school renovations. And we have a hard time understanding how as yet to be determined school renovations got ahead of us on that list, and would love some clarification. Our parents are fighting for our children and our school on a number of different fronts. We do have the systemic facility facilities issues that Jocelyn pointed out. We need facilities to deliver proper and equitable instruction according to today's standards. We compete for students, for base students, with shiny new schools and charter schools and private schools. We're sitting in North Raleigh, and parents have the means and the ability, and they're located right there to send their school children someplace else. So we lose about 100 base assigned sixth graders every year. And that flows through our 7th and our 8th grade. So we would love to maintain those base families because they don't leave once they get there, because we do have a fantastic community and wonderful teachers and a very supportive administration. Our location is brilliant. We are in North Raleigh. We are right there on Strickland Road. The only trouble is we're on a blind curve, which makes carpool like a gauntlet. And no one can tell we're actually there because we do have a bus lot located in front of the school. I lived less than a quarter of a mile from the school, and I didn't know it was there for the longest time. Safety is a concern because we are an open campus. We are afraid that the class size mandate is going to be the next excuse to move us down the list. We have an equity issue. We are at 47% free and reduced lunch according to our 2016 records. We simply want our children to have what other Wake County school children have. Flexible and collaborative learning spaces, an auditorium, which we do not have, proper dance and art rooms, and well-equipped science labs. I would love to see it. I would love for you to see it for yourself. Come visit us. Wear layers just in case the heat or the air conditioning is not working, and your hip waders. Thank you.
Michelle Miller.
1 second.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. Magic.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. My name is Michelle Miller, and I'm the parent of a current 8th grader at West Millbrook and the parent of a 10th grader at Millbrook High School who also attended West Millbrook. To give you some more context, my husband is actually a former West Millbrook Middle School student, and his mother was a counselor there for over 20 years. So you may be wondering why I'm telling you this, but I want you to know that it's important that when my husband and my mother-in-law come to West Millbrook, it looks the same as it did 30 years ago when they walked those halls, with a few small exceptions. So here we are 30 years later with a school that is literally falling apart. As others have mentioned, there are numerous issues that make our school building itself an environment that is not conducive to learning. I would like to share 2 specific examples from my own children to illustrate that point. When my son was in 6th grade, his Spanish class was in a trailer due to space issues within the school building. A trailer is not ideal, but what made it unbearable is that it was not air conditioned. So imagine sitting inside a not air-conditioned trailer in a 90-degree plus day that is sweltering. He told me today that she would have about 5 fans going every day to try and just circulate some air. So for the students, of course, it was miserable. But for the teacher, I can't believe she didn't walk out the door after dealing with that all the year. In the 200 building of West Millbrook, there is a distinct smell of urine that permeates all the time. In our family, we refer to this building as the pee building, and that may sound really crass, but it illustrates how bad the smell really is in there. Ironically, our health classes are held in this building, and our poor Spanish teacher has been moved from the sweltering trailer to this smelly building. My daughter has been in this building for health class for 3 years. Specifically last year, she would get headaches almost every day during the health class as the smell would make her nauseous. I think you would agree that learning was impacted when she could not concentrate due to these headaches. The teachers in this building have put up with this issue for years, and that's just unacceptable. Despite the many obstacles mentioned by the speakers here tonight, we have an extremely dedicated staff and administration that work hard to make sure that our students have what they need. But my question is, why is their job made more difficult by facilities that are substandard? A few years ago, I was PTA president at West Millbrook when we found out that we were finally getting the much-needed rebuild for our school community. There was excitement and hope for the changes that this would bring. Parents and staff attended meetings with the architects, and plans were drawn for the beautiful new building that would finally represent how great our school community really is. And then imagine our disappointment to learn yet again we were being pushed back down the list. I can tell you that the disappointment and frustration among West Millbrook families has reached a critical point. We have now been told that our school will not be rebuilt until 2023. While it is true that my children will be gone from West Millbrook soon, I'm here tonight because this school matters to our family and to our community at large. The students, teachers, and staff deserve better. Please make funding available as soon as possible for a rebuild of West Millbrook. Thank you.
Ann Edmondson.
Good evening. So I don't have any prepared remarks because I'm primarily here just to say that we are very grateful to, as a family, to have had two children to attend West Millbrook. My son is currently a freshman at Millbrook High School, and my daughter's in 6th grade. And we love the teachers, we love the administration. They've had an excellent education there, but as they say, the facilities are substandard. So that's really what I want to tell you and how important it is, because I have two very nervous but anxious young ones back here who want to tell you firsthand what their experience has been.
And Will, you get to go first.
Hi, I'm a 9th grader at Millbrook High School, but I went to West Millbrook for all 3 years, and I was on the football, basketball, and soccer team, and I was an officer in the Beta Club and the Student Council, and I'm just here to recall a couple instances of times where, because of the buildings and things wrong with it, we had disruptions in the classroom. So we've had students evacuated into my building, the 8th grade building, and prevented us from having PE because they filled up the whole gym. And there's literally brown liquid that smelled terrible seeping through the ceiling in my 7th grade science class. And there's been dead mice and countless bug infestations. And our gym is hideous, and I felt embarrassed after seeing the gyms at schools like East Millbrook, Durant, and Zebulon, and with clean, state-of-the-art, nice bleachers. And we hosted our opponents, including Leesville, East Wake, and Wakefield. And I noticed people watching from the lobby because we didn't have enough seats in the bleachers with more wood showing than paint and walls to match. Our locker rooms have lockers, but about 75% of them actually work, and the toilets constantly overflow. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your courage. Elise?
Hi, my name is Elise Edmondson, and I'm on my tippy toes.
You can push. I think Mr. Heath is going to help you out. There we go.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, my name is Elise Edmondson, and I'm a 6th grader at West Millbrook, and I love it. Absolutely love it. But it is definitely not in the best shape that it could be. In the 6th grade building, where I spend most of my time, in the science rooms, when we turn on the faucets, there will be orange colored water from the rust inside of the pipes. And just last quarter, the flooding evacuated the entire building, and we had to move into the really smelly trailers. And there are still 2 water fountains that have not worked from the first day that I went there. And then in my math class, which is in the 7th grade building, we were evacuated because the heating systems didn't work, and so we were moved into the multi-purpose room. Yeah, the multi-purpose room in the 6th grade building, which we were set up with folding chairs and folding tables and no technology and not even American flags, so we had to pull one up on the computer when we said the pledge. Just yesterday, a piece of plaster fell out of the ceiling in my band classroom, and so we had to delay classes so that they could get that moved out and fix the ceiling. And I've heard reports of other things like that happening from the other 8th grade teachers. And when my band class went to Ligon, I'm in the band, when our band class went to Ligon for MPA, we just couldn't help but feel jealous at their huge auditorium that was hosting like hundreds of people in it when we have all of our band our band concerts in the gym. And so we were a little bit jealous because it's so big and we're kind of mediocre. And like I said, I love West Millbrook dearly, and the staff is amazing. And I'm in awe of how they can do so much with so little. So please don't wait to rebuild our school. We need it desperately, and it could do so much. Thank you for your time.
At least I didn't notice a nervous bone. Thank you. Bob Giolis.
Hi, I'm Bob Giolis, and my son Charlie is a sixth grader at West Millbrook, and I'm attended the school in 1978. It was a brand new school at the time. And when these young people talk about it's not quite what it used to be, I resemble that remark. I'm not quite what I was all those years ago. And look, it's charming to see my son walk through the same halls I walked through, or to go to the same band room that I went to. But he shouldn't have to do that. I know you guys have a lot of pressure on you in terms of the needs and responsibilities. But in 1977, 78, when I attended school there, we were seeing our economy grow and change in unique ways. We had the growth of the Research Triangle Park. In fact, one of my classmates was Jill Doherty, whose son Dick Doherty was the head of the IBM facility in the Research Triangle Park. We had great confidence in our future. Our leaders were building new schools for us. We were in a growing and dynamic place. We had a lot of faith and confidence in the future. I did well enough at West Millbrook to go on and actually became the president and CEO of the Research Triangle Park. I just finished there about a year ago. I know that park and its legacy was because our leaders made the investments they had to make. We drew 40,000 people to RTP. We grew the Triangle because of faith and confidence in education. We made those investments. The fact that my son Charlie or any of these kids should not be given that same opportunity, why should they have to go to schools in a place that your predecessors had confidence to invest in? Why we can't make those same investments in our kids today, considering that we're riding on the shoulders of giants who grew this great Triangle region. So I ask you, if the school has been moved down, look at why that has happened and do what is right to make the investments that need to be made. All of us are counting on you, and we know you have a lot of work, but we would appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Kathy Robertson.
Good evening. I'm not with Millbrook, but I feel for you. I have 3 kids. This year, we are preparing to celebrate 5 years of my 16-year-old niece surviving a bone marrow transplant, which required chemotherapy and which resulted in total hair loss. The devastation from having no friends, no hair, and being constantly sick, going in and out of the hospital, resulted in extensive counseling for my niece, Alyssa. At many, many, many points in her young life, she did not want to live. But she survived all of her health issues, only, it seems, to have to constantly endure being bullied and terrorized, as well as being physically assaulted at Fuquay-Varina High School. She is and has been the constant.
Let me just interject for a second. I so apologize. I know this is an important matter for you, but individual, student, and personnel matters and complaints are not really designed for public comments. There is a policy. There's 1710 and 1720 are policies that the board has.
And I have a policy that I want to speak to.
Okay, that addresses, those 2 policies address ways that you can file complaints for any bullying, harassment.
Correct.
But this is not the appropriate forum. as the chair indicated right in the beginning, this is not designed for individual student or personnel matters.
Okay, so I can't ask about a policy here in this forum?
You can, if you're moving to a policy, you can ask about a policy, but you can no longer discuss an individual student complaint.
Okay, well, so that was my introduction to the policy. So am I allowed to finish the introduction and so just go to the policy?
Please refrain from talking about the individual student matter. If you're going to talk about policy, then you can move to that.
Sure. So what I found out, there was an incident that occurred yesterday, and that's why I'm here today. And we were advised that she was attacked. It was placed on a video.
So you're still talking about the individual. Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Order.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
We asked them,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please file.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're continuing to talk about an individual
okay, so
student matter.
Let me bypass all that again.
Yeah.
So there is a policy that Wake County has that we were advised about yesterday, which states that if you file a restraining order, that the student who is the victim is the one who has to be removed. That's the policy that we were advised about. So we're here tonight to say if that is truly the policy, in that if a victim requests a restraining order and then the victim is punished by being the one who is removed from their environment, then we would request that that policy be reconsidered. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson's going to wait for you so he can find out exactly what policy. So I think he's going to meet you in just a second that we can address it. He's going to come over. He will find you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Come down. Great.
Sean Jackson.
Greetings. My name is Sean Jackson. I'm a PTA member and parent of a 7th grader at West Millbrook and a 3rd grader at Northridge Elementary School. You've heard our stories tonight about how our facility is failing us. By far, on the tours that folks come, the potential families that are interested, one of the biggest deterrents and concerns from those families is our facility. Yet you have invested in us. You have granted a magnet program, the IB magnet program, and we are grateful for that. We have steadfast leadership and Principal Amen. We have committed and energized faculty members. We currently have about 94 magnet students enrolled in the program for the fall, and we are expecting one of the largest 6th grade classes we've seen in years of almost 350 students. So we are poised for success. Think of it this way. At West Millbrook, we are painting a masterpiece. We have the vision of what we want it to be. We have the paintbrushes to help it take shape. We have the paint to color it in. We don't have the canvas. We are painting a masterpiece on a piece of paper, and it simply is not going to hold up. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration on a more timely rebuild for West Millbrook Magnet Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes our public comment for this evening. And our next item is an information item, which is a presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget. Dr. Burns and Mr. Nieder.
Madam Chair, members of the Wake County Board of Education, given the overall strength of the economy at every level, it might seem odd to hear the Wake County public school system is at a financial crossroads. But as I examine the school district's budget for the coming year, it is difficult for me to avoid any other conclusion. In many ways, our magnet programs, application schools, and strong neighborhood school offerings are the envy of other schools throughout the country. But yet, we have to overcome still the funding challenges that began during the Great Recession and lingered for years. From fiscal year 2010 to fiscal year 2012, for example, the amount of the county appropriation was virtually unchanged despite enrollment increases of several thousand students each year. When local funding began to increase again, the increases in 2013 and 2014 simply matched student growth for those years, failing to account for inflation, replacement costs, and unfunded mandates shifted from the state to the county after the Great Recession. Local funding began to increase noticeably in 2015, with exceptionally generous funding from the county commissioners in 2016. But that single year was not enough to free the system from its budget constraints. This year's budget review exposes that harsh reality in several key areas. For example, in an effort to manage our expanding enrollment, the district will open 4 new schools in 2018-2019. Staffing and maintaining those schools accounts for most of the $10.9 million needed to pay for growth next year. Most of the $11.3 million required for program continuity can be traced to federal money for our special education students. Many school districts received this one-time allotment from the federal government following the recession. Our money lasted much longer than predicted due to superior fiscal management. This year, that fund is finally depleted. Decisions at the state level present a special challenge this year, potentially increasing our school system costs by as much as $19.5 million. The costs cover a wide range of issues, such as the local share of retirement and hospitalizations, millions of dollars that now pass directly to charter schools, phasing in new class size limits, and local costs for anticipated teacher salary raises. If new programs were the only item funded with the additional county appropriations, I could slash the budget request in front of you by more than 80%. In fact, many of our new academic changes are simply absorbed into the county budget. In addition, we've removed $16 million in one-time expenses from the current budget, and we have repurposed almost $10 million for specific efforts in our strategic plan. Having drawn down the district's unassigned fund balance every year since 2013, less than $5 million of that fund is now available to apply to next year's needs. That amount is 1% of the county's current annual appropriation to the school system. All of the details can be found in the proposed budget document that's presented this evening. That said, I do not want the current budget challenge to overshadow the countless success stories that make up this wonderful school system. Our Vision 2020 strategic plan continues to embed itself in our everyday work, shaping a wide range of changes from math and language arts classes to alternative student assessments and a renewed emphasis on customer service. Our graduation rate is the highest in the district's history at 88.5%, with improvements for minority students exceeding the district's growth rate for the 4th consecutive year. The graduation rate at more than 2/3 of our high schools now exceeds 90%. More than 97% of teachers in the Wake County Public School System met or exceeded the North Carolina academic growth standards this past year. We've led the nation in the number of national board certified teachers for 13 consecutive years. A large majority of our schools are diverse and thriving, and we remain an economic engine for our community, helping to attract and retain families who in turn help sustain the county's overall progress. All of these highlights have made it a delight for me to serve as temporary superintendent while you, the Board of Education, selects a new permanent leader. And these highlights also compel me to spotlight the fiscal challenges we face. Should the budget needs identified here not be funded, the Wake County Public School System will survive. But the Wake County Public School System I have known for more than 4 decades is not about just surviving. It's never been just enough to carry on for this district. This is a community driven to excel, And I would be remiss if I did not bring you a budget proposal that makes that possible. Members of the board, at this time, I will invite David Nieder, Chief Operations Officer, to provide details regarding the budget proposal this evening. Mr. Nieder.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Burns. I'll now get into, as Dr. Burns mentioned, some of the details of the proposed operating budget. As I start, I'd like to provide some background on the environment we developed the budget in, including the budget timeline, development timeline, the state of the economy, both during the time we developed the budget as well as looking forward into the coming year. Also, state legislative changes that we're currently aware of that are impacting our budget. Then I'll get into the budget document itself and provide an overview of that. Then we'll talk to you about some risk factors, give you an orientation to the budget document, and to finish up, we'll give you a timeline of where you go from tonight. So the budget development timeline goes all the way back to last fall. We began in the September-October timeframe. And members of the superintendent's leadership team, school administrators, central administrators, all representing the strategic plan, participated in the development from the onset. Since then, the board has seen at their finance committee meeting in January a budget update, at your work session in March, on March 14th, an update on the K-3 class size budget implications. We gave you a couple different scenarios. We presented again at the joint boards meeting at the end of March, and then tonight you're hearing the superintendent's proposed budget. Before we look at the economic landscape, I want to remind everyone about one very important thing. North Carolina is very different than most of the rest of the country in a lot of ways, but I'm speaking specifically about public school funding tonight. 90% of the rest of the school boards in this nation are fiscally independent, excuse me. And they have some level of taxing authority and some level, if not total, control over their funding. North Carolina and a few other states are fiscally dependent. Flipping that around, they have no direct control over any of their funding. Again, I bring this up just as a reference point as we look at the environment. So most of you know this, but I wanted to just share with you where the funding comes from. 59% comes from the state, 30% from the county appropriation, 7% from the federal government, and 4% from other local sources, things like fines and forfeitures. So that being said, almost 90% of our funding comes from two sources: the state and the county appropriation. So as we look at developing our budget, looking at the state of those sources, those two sources, economies, is very important. So some of you have seen this in prior years. This is a chart of leading economic indicators developed by Dr. Michael Walden, a professor at NC State University. And basically what this is, it indicates how does the economy look into the future. And the higher the numbers, the better. If you look on the far left of the chart, that was pre-Great Recession, and you see then a dip down. That was the height of the Great Recession. And at the far right is the most recent report, and it's monthly, so the latest month here is March of 2018. You'll see that the index is a little bit higher than it was even pre-Great Recession. What's the takeaway here? Looking into the future, things look really good for the rest of this year and into next year for the state economy. Again, things could change. We could get into a national trade war that could turn something around, but overall the state economy looks very strong going forward. Next thing I would like you to look at is a chart showing unemployment rates, which are also a very good indicator of the state of the economy. The blue line at the bottom is Wake County. Again, with unemployment, a smaller number is better. The yellow line is the U.S., and the red line is North Carolina. And that little gray shaded section is when the Great Recession took place. You can see how the rates have dropped significantly since then, and you can see that at all levels, state, national, and local, the current unemployment rates are very low. Again, a very good thing for the economy. This next chart shows the gross domestic product of the state of North Carolina. Basically, it's a measure of the value of all the products and services produced within the state. And again, that gray shaded area is the Great Recession. You can see a significant growth in the GDP of North Carolina over this period of time. And again, the takeaway, it's about a 30% increase in GDP growth, again indicating a very strong and growing economy in the state. I have not included any national information here, but again, as a nation, the economy is doing very well. So now I want to look at some local things. Wake County by the numbers. I found this on the Wake County government website. I thought it was interesting and some of this pertinent for tonight. On this first chart, it talks about people. We continue to gain an average of 63 new residents every day. It's not slowing down. And now personal economics. Again, we have already seen the low unemployment rate we enjoy here in Wake County. We also have a very educated population with over 53% of our adults having a bachelor's degree or higher, and a median household income of over $76,000. And I believe, haven't done a statistical regression, that those three things are linked. The one not good item on this list is that we have just over 9% of our county population living below the federal poverty threshold. That's just under 1 out of every 10 people. And while there was a slight reduction on it, you see the downward arrow, it was a slight reduction. That is unfortunate. And this last slide on Wake County by the numbers talks about development. Again, I'm not going to read the numbers, because with those people, those 60-some people every day on average, come houses, condos, townhouses, apartments, and commercial buildings. One thing before I finish this slide I found interesting that I didn't see in any of the Wake County by the numbers. What were the average ride times doing from point A to point B, from one part of the county to the other, year over year? But I think we all know the answer to that. Okay, a little bit more on Wake County. The left graph is comparing Wake County to the rest of the state on the percent of the population of adults with high school diplomas. Again, you'll see Wake County leads the state. And then on the right, the same information, but for those adults that have a bachelor's degree or higher, we're significantly above the state. 53% to compare to some 30%. Again, we've got a very educated population. Next, comparing median household income. This is going to compare North Carolina, which is red, at the bottom, U.S. in the middle, yellow, and Wake County, the blue line, at the top. And again, the takeaway here is Wake County's median household income is significantly higher than the state or the nation. So, takeaways here. National, state, and local economic results are strong. Leading economic indicators looking forward are positive. The 2018-19 operating budget should look easy. You've already heard from Dr. Burns, perhaps not. And I'll remind everyone back to slide 2, LEAs in the state of North Carolina are fiscally dependent. Let's switch over to the state now and the economic landscape. Back in December, the Office of State Budget and Management issued a report on the state of the state's economy. This chart shows state revenue, tax revenue, over time, going back to fiscal year 2010 and projected into fiscal year 2019. And you'll see it's a single line that then splits apart. From 2010 to 2013, that single line are actual tax revenues. And then when it splits apart from post-2013 to the end, the top line are what state revenues would have been had tax code not changed in the state. The bottom line are actual revenues based upon the new tax code. The takeaway here that if the tax code was not changed, the state next year would have about $3 billion of additional revenues that it will not have, and the year after next would have an estimated $4 billion of additional revenues that it does not have. The intent of the tax cut was to stimulate the economy, which would then in turn drive state revenues. I'm not seeing the trickle down just yet. And again, with the state being responsible for almost 60% of our funding, their revenues are very important to us, that they remain strong. So on the flip side of what you just saw with state revenues, which are used to provide that 60-some% of our funding, here's a slide that takes a look at what state K-12 spending looks like over a period of time from 2007-8 up to 2015-16. This is from that same report from the Office of State Budget and Management. Between that period of time, real per pupil K-12 spending has dropped by almost 10%. Wake County receives almost $1 billion of state funding per year to operate. The math is pretty straightforward. 10%, $1 billion, $100 million hole, round numbers. All this during a thriving economy. As Dr. Burns mentioned in his comments, Wake County has, in recent years, seen increases in the county appropriation, a very significant one in 2015-16 of 13%. And then in 2 subsequent years, a 6% increase and a 5% increase. All very needed. I'll pose some rhetorical questions. Did those significant increases move us forward, or is it really just catching up for prior years? Did it move us forward or provide backfilling for state funding and decision making? And does it move us forward or replace the use of one-time funds? Again, Wake County is growing rapidly, its population is educated, and our median household income is significantly higher than the state and the nation. Yet meeting the funding needs of Wake County Public Schools, Wake County and Wake Tech continue to challenge our respective boards annually. We've got competing needs between operating requirements and infrastructure. You heard some public speakers speak to the infrastructure side. Tonight I'm speaking on the operating side. They're competing for the same dollars ultimately. And my last rhetorical question, is growth paying for itself? We have additional challenges as well as we look at the budget. The first, the state removal of flexibility in converting resources. I won't get into the details, but starting this year and then into next year, additional reductions in flexibility occur. We used to be able to effectively create local savings through effective conversion, still provide the same services. That flexibility, as it's been removed, we estimate will reduce those local savings somewhere between $4 and $6 million per year. K-3 class size legislation, I'll get into a little more detail on this in a minute, impacts our local funding needs. State employer benefit rate increases impact our local funding needs. Utility rate increases, and our reduction in one-time carryover funding, which I'll talk about again in a minute. So all those things I just mentioned, the removal of flexibility, class size, benefit rate, utility rate, increases in inability to no longer have carryover funding to apply to a budget, all require local funding just to stay in place. And that's before funding for the student growth and the building of new schools, which again, just keeps us in place. This is a graph showing the unassigned fund balance, and that's the blue line, and its history going back to 2008. You'll see it was just under $19 million pre-Great Recession, and that was representative of about 3% of the county appropriation, which was, and by board policy still is, our target to maintain an unassigned fund balance approximating 3%. You'll see we, by design, built that up during the Great Recession as there were so many unanticipated things going on. And then we began working that down, but not down to a level that approximated 3% of our county appropriation, but much further down. And at the end of the last fiscal year, it was right around $10 million. Therefore, the amount we're putting in to balance next year's operating budget in the proposed budget is just under $5 million. In order to provide the same level of services without being able to have that fund balance to put towards a budget requires additional resources or a reduction in services. And again, as Dr. Burns mentioned, having only $5 million in unassigned fund balance to address emergency issues doesn't give me warm, soft, fuzzy feelings, and it does keep me up at times at night. This next slide is the second area of reduction in one-time carryover funding, and again, Dr. Burns mentioned this. This is in the area of special education funding we received, ARA funds, during the Great Recession. Again, you see that there are three different types of funding, but one main one. You'll see the big jump up in the blue line, which is IDEA Title 6B, some smaller ramp ups on the other two lines, and then you see over time how we've been using those to meet the service level needs of our special needs students without asking for local funding. Well, that's coming to an end. Those carryover amounts are coming to an end. So if we want to continue, and we must, providing services to these students, we must identify additional funding. So this is the last slide on the background landscape on the budget. So to summarize, we have a strong national, state, and local economy. That being said, we continue to face challenges and pressures that I liken to those we faced during the Great Recession, albeit for different reasons. To begin to address some of these challenges, we've put into place a freeze on central services spending of local funds for non-mission critical areas. We've also placed a freeze on vacant positions, central service positions. Those freezes will remain through the end of the fiscal year, and I think there's a strong likelihood they will continue into the next year. Let me now move into the actual budget. This shows the budget. It's a $1.65 billion operating budget. That does not include the capital portion of the budget, just the operating side. And you can see that, again, the vast majority of our funding goes straight to the schools, 92%. And I would posit that more than that really goes directly to serve our schools, because in that next category, the orange slice, which is 5% for operation support, the biggest part of that 5% are things like utilities for our schools, maintenance for our schools, child nutrition services, transportation to get our students to and from schools. So I would posit it's closer to 95, 96% that is directly supporting our schools. And then a 1% for tech services, another 1% for academic advancement, and the final 1% for the Board of Education, Superintendent, Chief of Staff, and our Communications Department. And again, we have requested $47.8 million of local funding, not for new things, but for things to keep us in place: growth, program continuity, legislative impact, inflation. We've requested $11.1 million for newer expanding programs. The proposed budget has $16 million in one-time expenditures removed, $2.8 million in program elimination or reduction, and repurposing of almost $10 million to take existing resources and repurpose them to use them to fund things aligned with our strategic plan. Let me now get into the categories within the budget. The first is growth. It continues to be a significant driver of the budget. $10.9 million of local funding to meet the growth needs, again, to maintain, not to move forward. It's primarily investment in people to serve the additional students, and an operating cost to open the new schools. Here's the chart. It goes back to 2010-11 through our projections for next year. The students keep coming. They're not coming quite as quickly as they were previously, but they're still coming. And there are local costs associated with those students. There are additional teachers. The state funds the majority of it, but we fund their salary supplement. We have more generous formulas. We locally fund that. Same thing in the area of special education, instructional supplies. The state gives us some money for that. We supplement that. We do that on a per student basis. Safety assistance, etc. And then on the facility side, again, a chart going back to 2010-11. Back in 2010-11, it looks like we had 163 schools. We'll have 187 next year, with 4 opening, 2 elementary, a middle, and a high. And again, each of those comes with operating costs, utilities, custodial, maintenance, and groundskeeping. We do not get state funding for that. So that was growth. Program continuity. Program continuity is basically something that requires additional funding to be able to continue to provide a service that we have been already providing. Let me talk about one example, middle schools, and this is a funding request in our budget. Most of our middle schools currently convert teacher ADM resources to create a third assistant principal position, which they believe they need and we believe they need to effectively manage their schools. That flexibility is being removed, the ability to convert. So our budget is including a funding request of $3.2 million to allow our middle schools to continue to have that third assistant principal position. And then the second major area within program continuity is special education student services. The diminishment of the carryover funds, you saw the graph on that a few minutes ago, creates another significant need for additional funds just to stay in place. This need for additional funding for the special education students is also being driven mostly by the carryover that's been diminished, but some by the changing number of students in the population, our population of special needs students. We're getting an increased percentage of our total population that have greater and more complex needs, and there's a higher cost of serving those students. Inflation is the next category. Inflation continues to remain low, yet there's $1.5 million of local funding required to stay in place for lease escalation increases and utility rate increases. Again, to maintain, not move forward. And now legislative impact. By its single category, the single largest one. Decisions made by the state impact local funding needs by just under $20 million. The first area I'll go through is the class size requirement. Our estimate is we will need just over $4 million for 2018-19 of local funding to meet the needs of the class size requirement the state has put in place. It's a 4-year phase-in, so we will need additional funding in each of the next 3 years as well. At the end of the 4-year period, we will receive an additional $24 million from the state for teachers, enhancement teachers. But along with those teachers comes the need to pay a local salary supplement and local benefits that at the end of the 3 years will be about $3 million, or about $750,000 for this year. So that $4.1 million number for this year, of that $750,000 is this year's portion of the matching benefits and the salary supplement. The state is funding enhancement teachers as a ratio of 1 to 191 students. Our current formula is 1 to 143 students. So again, to maintain our existing formula, this year we'll need an additional $400,000 to implement the K-3 class size. And you see below there the additional amounts that will be required in the remaining 3 years. And again, with growth, those numbers will go up. Wake County allots state teaching months at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the second month, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction adjusts our allotments based upon student counts going up or student counts going down. But class sizes change throughout the year, but the state doesn't allot additional resources. So with the new House Bill 90 requirements, one student over the size limit triggers one new teacher with an average starting salary of $60,000 for salary and benefits at that entry level. Previously, as new students arrived mid-year, class size could change. Now once the class size limit is reached and that one student over is triggered, we have to add another teacher with no additional funding from the state. And the two numbers I mentioned previously, plus the funding for these additional teachers, come back to the $4.1 million we're estimating we will need to implement the state class size legislation. The other areas under legislative impact, we're estimating the state will legislate an increase of 2% for teachers and school administrators, and we're estimating that the state will implement a $1,000 per non-certified employee increase. Those are just estimates. We do not know what the actual legislation will be. We've included in our proposed budget a 2% increase for teachers and school administrators, and we've included in our budget a proposal for a $1,000 increase if that, for non-certified employees. And if that $1,000 is not 2%, whatever it takes to bring it to 2%. The new state principal salary schedule had a hold harmless provision that the state would basically hold principals harmless for the current year. There is no provision to continue that. If the state does not continue to fund that hold harmless, we are asking for $327,000 of local funding so we can't hold our principals harmless. Of the amount of funding that we're requesting additional funding from the county, it's not all for the Wake County public school systems. About 10% of that goes from us to the charter schools. And then last, the employer matching benefit rate contributions. That's the local portion. The state covers the state-funded employees. $3.4 million of additional local funding. And I thought you'd find it interesting. Mark Winters, our finance officer, pulled this information, and Terry Kimsey, our senior director of budget. Here are a couple charts to give you a sense of how these increases have impacted our costs and our funding needs. From 2007-8 to next year. The left chart shows the state retirement contribution rates. You'll see back in 07-08, as an employer, we had to contribute just under 8% of an employee's salary to fund the retirement contribution. Today, or next year I should say, be over 18%. A little over $4,000 for health insurance back in 07-08. Next year, over $6,000. I think it's about $6,200. So, 135% increase for retirement contributions over that period of time, requiring for next year's budget $49.5 million of local funding to pay the employer portion for the retirement contribution. And again, that's for our locally funded employees. The state picks up the state-funded employees. Looking on the other side, a 49% increase in the health insurance contribution rates for Wake County Public Schools as an employer. And our total funding required for next year will be $21.6 million of local funding to fund that benefit. And again, those are for just locally funded employees. Significant increases, far exceeding inflation.
That should be noted, our teachers are paying their share as well, so that's a reduction to their salary.
Yes, it is not fully paid by the employer anymore. Each employee is also paying. And yes. So now in the final category, new and expanding programs. As this board, I think, well knows, new programming funding has consistently been left behind. The needs of growth, legislative impact, and program continuity frequently absorb any new funds or most of the new funds. The proposed budget requests $11.1 million of funding and local funding to move forward, not to stay in place. The majority of that funding is in these categories. The first, AIG programs, $3.1 million. The state does provide funding for our AIG students. However, the state places a cap on that funding at 4% of our student population. we have about 15% of our student population that are identified as AIG. So to fill that gap would require, the gap between that 4% cap and fully funding us would require an additional just under $24 million of additional funding. So while this $3.1 million doesn't close the gap significantly, it's a first step. And again, this funding, if it's received, would be used for the K-2 nurturing program at elementary schools. The next item, the standard treatment protocol, again, not much money, $250,000. That would be funding to support MTTS, the multi-tiered system of support teams. The next item, student social and emotional learning, $5.1 million. This would be funding for counselors, social workers, psychologists. Again, it all adds up to 681 months of employment, 68 10-month positions. It's a lot, but it's not when we have 180 plus schools and over 160,000 students. But again, it's a step. The teacher extra duty salary schedule adjustment, that amount would bring us, if we are able to apply it to this budget and apply it to the extra duty schedule, would give us one more year after this to finish what was intended to be originally a 5-year implementation, but to finish the implementation of revision of the extra duty schedule. And again, as you think back, we turned that schedule into a living schedule because we based it off of the beginning teacher salary, which should be changing over time, so it's not a static schedule like it was previously. Technology updates, $350,000. This is to further expand the online registration program to make our customer service for our parents better. And the last item, $300,000, would provide, it's a student ID system for our yellow bus transportation. It's a product that links into the existing Synovia system, which is our GPS tracking system. That also is what parents use, the app on their phone, so they can track their child on the bus or see where the bus is. We already tagged the students. We would add a barcode to the student's tag, and then we would be able to know what stop or what location a student is getting on the bus and what stop a student is getting off the bus. The important thing here is being able to locate a student when there are situations where a student is not locatable. We at least know the point that they got off the bus or the point they got on the bus. There's a lot more functionality that we'd like to implement. It requires a significant investment beyond that can ensure that the proper students are getting on the proper buses, but we're not including that in this year's request. So that's newer expanding programs. But again, of the increased local funding request, 80% keeps us in place. Risk factors, funding for bus driver compensation. We cut our transportation budget by $3 million this year based on not being able to attract enough bus drivers. When and if, and I hope it's not a matter of if, but it's just when we won't have the funding for that. We will need to find it. Our estimates for charter school numbers are just that, estimates. The numbers could come in higher. The amount we've included in our budget would be underneath that amount. That's a potential risk. We don't receive much of our federal funding until several months into the start of the fiscal year. The amounts may be less than what we're estimating. That's a risk. Costs on the facility side for the K-3 class size implementation may come as early as this year. We don't have any budget set aside for that. The operating costs, the $4.1 million of operating costs I shared with you, is based on our estimates. Estimates are projections. There's no crystal ball. The actual cost may come in higher. This would be a happy problem, this next one, but the legislative compensation changes may come in higher than what we've estimated, which means the local funding portion of it, we will need to find additional local funds. I say this on behalf of valuing our staff. That will be a happy problem to have to address. The employer retirement and health insurance rates have already been set for the current year by the legislature, but when they come back in the short session, they could increase them. And finally, in the area of lapsed salary, our current budget is based upon 5,000 months of lapsed salary. That means we've got 5,000 months of positions with no funding underneath it. And if our vacancy rate declines and we go through those, we don't have those lapsed salaries, we could have a gap. Okay, now the last section. Let me give you a quick orientation to your actual budget document. Document is posted on our website. It's in PDF format. You can view it on the website or download it. And all the versions of the budget will be posted there. If you go to the front of your book, the very front of the document is the superintendent's message, which he shared with you tonight. And then flipping a page, you get to the table of contents. Again, I'm just going to give you an orientation. I'm not going through these actual sections. If you turn to page 1, pages 1 through 5 give you what we call budget at a glance. A very high level, 50,000 foot level at the budget. Where does the money come from? What is it used for? Turn to page 7. Pages 7 and 8 go over budget development. You have both the timeline as well as a brief explanation of the budget development process and how we use categories for different things. So it's very helpful, especially for some of our newer board members. I think that would be very helpful for you. Page 13 shows budget changes by category. And again, you heard the different categories: growth, program, continuity, etc. And this basis changes by funding source. Pages 14 through 20 provide you a summary of funding requests and changes. Pages 21 through 38 are your organizational section, including the board's strategic plan, organizational charts, and board's budget policies. Pages 39 to 58 are your financial section, including revenues, budget by object code, staff budget, and changes in staff. Pages 59 through 196 are the actual individual funding requests and funding changes. And again, you can see the categories, and it's not all requests. It includes removal of prior year one-time costs, program elimination and reduction as well. And finally, to finish up very quickly, want to talk to you about the timeline. You'll have a board work session 1 week from today. We'll also have a public hearing on the budget 1 week from today. And if the board deems necessary, additional work sessions or a finance committee could be scheduled. The work sessions, they're for the board to discuss the budget and basically direct the superintendent and staff to make changes, additions, deletions, revisions. In preparation for next week's work session, We'll ask you to direct any questions to Terry Kimsey, our Senior Director of Budget. Her email address is listed. And we'll ask you to do that by the end of the day Friday. We realize that's a very short turnaround time. We realize that this budget development cycle has been compressed, but we all felt the need to get a handle on what our class size plan to implement and its budget implications. It was important to get that behind us before we brought a budget to you. So again, we'll ask you to get those questions to Terry Kimsey by Friday, and I'll look over at Ms. Kimsey and acknowledge I realize that gives us one business day, Monday, to respond and get ready for Tuesday, maybe one and a half, you count half of Tuesday. Can we get, can we get the PowerPoint back up? Let me continue because I know you've heard a lot and you've got this in your materials. The last piece is the rest of the timeline. The board approves, we're targeting you approving the budget at your May 1st meeting. The budget has to be to the county by May 15th. And if you don't approve it at your May 1st meeting, your next meeting is on May 15th. We don't know if we'll have a state budget by June 30. We've been in that boat before. We don't know that we'll have final adjustments to whatever the final county appropriation is by June 30th. We frequently don't. So again, an interim budget is possible. So that's my presentation for tonight. I'd like to close it out by acknowledging Terry Kimsey. She and her staff put in a phenomenal amount of effort that really can't begin to be appreciated in putting this document together. And I just want to thank you very much. And Mark Winters and his staff helps as well. Thank you, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nieder, Mr. Winters, Ms. Kimsey, and all of your staff who clearly have done the yeoman's work of laying this before us. And thank you also for presenting it to us in a way that we can take bite size of it to kind of process and talk through any questions, immediate feedback from board members other than if I had an emoji and just have a little frown and shoulders. But I'm going to give folks a moment for responses. Mr. Sutton.
I just have a couple of high-level questions. I'm sure we'll get into the details later. The 1.6 or almost 1.7 billion, is this the largest budget ever that we've ever had?
I would want to check that on the operating side. It likely is.
Oh, that might. Thought it might be. It's got to be pretty close. And am I correct in the 47.8 million? Is it of the local appropriation? Are you saying that's the same as last year? That we're keeping that the same?
I'm not sure I understood your question, Mr. Sutton.
Mr. Sutton, I understand your question. The almost $48 million in the total of almost $59 million increase in the county appropriation, the $48 million is to provide the current level of programs and services with no change. So of the $59 million, the total increase in the county appropriation, $48 million is to maintain the current level of programs and services.
Okay, so it's actually 59 million.
The total is close to 59 million, yes, sir.
Okay. And that's an increase of what from last year?
59 million is the increase.
It's an increase.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Sutton, if you look on page 6 of your budget book, I think that may help you as well.
Okay. Got it. Good.
Anyone else? Comments? Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Johnson-Hostler. So we're going to have a week, well, just till Friday for us to come up with questions, but in the coming weeks, as we reflect on this budget, I think we need to take to heart that this is a reflection of what we value. I mean, a budget is a value book, but also that I would like to challenge us to look at it through a lens of equity in our programs and where our funding is going. If we can work hard as a board to ask the right questions of staff and examine where they're suggesting our expansions, but the expansions are minimal, and it's just maintaining current level of service is making up a huge, the majority of our increase. So it's going to take a while for us to wrap our heads around that, but thank you for clarifying where those increases are going. So thank you.
Okay. We have a few days to process and ask questions.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve our consent items?
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We will continue with our finance folks. Mr. Nieder, Mr. Winter, regarding recommendation of external audit contract. Mr. Winters, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, board members, and Superintendent. Board policy requires an annual financial audit of the school system, and our current contract has completed its third and final year, and a request for a proposal was released in February. Staff reviewed the proposals with the board's audit committee over the last 2 weeks, and tonight we bring the audit committee's recommendation to select Dixon, Hughes, and Goodman to conduct our annual financial audit.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the external audit contract to be granted to Dixon, Hughes, and Goodman. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Winters and his staff for the hard work that went into the selection. The audit committee met twice. Several recommendations, three bids were reviewed, but it's, I think, given the deep experience of the auditors that they're suggesting, as well as I think the good practice for us to, after 6 years, have a different audit company than we did the previous 6 years. It's just to get new eyes on our budget, and just want to again thank staff for bringing this forward.
Second.
Mr. Blumberg, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to make sure we knew we had the motion. I wanted to make sure we had the second. Well done.
And it was an extended motion. Thank you.
Yes, it was. No, not a problem. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I believe we had discussed in executive that we wanted to notify that this was a one-year decision because we're going to have an RFP, were we not, Dr. Burns, for audit firms coming up?
That changed.
That was a discussion, Dr. Martin, and when the external audit committee met, that recommendation changed.
That's correct. This is a new firm.
And it's not for 1 year either.
The anticipated term is what?
It's anticipated 3 year.
Okay.
We renew every year, but it's anticipated 3 year. Yes.
Thank you. That's the clarity we were looking for. Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you. Next, looks like Ms. Deneater on transportation and the bill schedule recommendations for 18-19 school year.
Good evening again, and I'll be much briefer. At your March 20th work session, staff presented the recommended bell changes or bell schedules for the 2018-19 school year. Included in that schedule were the 4 new schools that are opening next year. They've been added to our overall schedule list. They include South Garner High, Apex Middle, and Bryan Road and Buckhorn Road. The recommended bell schedules for these 4 new schools are all aligned with our standards for high, elementary, and middle schools, respectively. The only actual change to the overall schedule from the current year is to shift Northridge Elementary from an 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. schedule to a 9:15 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. schedule. The reason for the recommended change is the school is moving into its temporary swing space, and the later start time will allow for increased transportation times to the temporary swing space. The principal at Northridge supports this, and he's communicated this with his parents. Finally, we shared with you at the March 20th work session that both East Garner Middle School and East Millbrook Middle School have requested to add 10 minutes to their instructional day for 2018-19. As transportation developed its routing plan for the 18-19 year, we will do everything possible to accommodate these 2 requests. If we are able to accommodate it, it may be 10 minutes added to the front end of the day, it may be 10 minutes added to the back end of the day, or it may be 5 minutes added to both ends of the day. But again, we have not included those changes in the schedule. At the point we determine if we can accommodate those changes, we certainly will bring them back to the board. And with that, I would ask the board's consideration of approval.
Mr. Sutton.
Move to approve the request for bell schedules for the upcoming year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ms. Cash.
Northridge parents don't like this, of course, but I understand why we have to do it this year. But it's been indicated to them very clearly, and I don't think their principal does agree with it, because he's been telling them by letter to send concerns to me, and that he hasn't found out, he hasn't really indicated a support of this, but it's okay. I understand why we have to do it this year, but it was told that it would be just for 1 year because of the change of the location. So I want to make sure that's understood. And the second question is, since there's also been a discussion that they were told there would be early morning care, because they've been on, most of the parents have, they've been on the schedule for a long time. So I'm not sure at East Millbrook how we're going to do that at the modular area. And that was told them by the principal too.
I will be glad to work with Deputy Superintendent Moore to discuss those school-based issues and coordinate whatever we need to coordinate.
So will we have early morning care?
I do not know the answer to that, Ms. Cash. But again, we will follow up. I'll work with Ms. Moore, and we will follow up.
Okay, and I just want to reiterate the fact that they were told it was a 1-year situation. So I'm expecting that since the reason is location and moving, that we'll go back to the old schedule because they'll be going back to their location next year. That's my comments.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Mr. Nieder, when talking about bell schedules, this is always a topic for parents and one that I hear a lot about. I know a while back there was a study looking at what it would take financially for Wake County to eliminate the 3-tier bus system and move to 1 tier. Can you remind me of what that figure was and approximately approximately how long ago that was done?
That study was done, I'll say, approximately 4 years ago, that time frame. And effectively to take what is primarily a 3-tier system and compress it into a 1-tier system would triple the size, not triple the cost, but would triple the size of the operation. At the time, the estimate was in the $100 million range. Okay. That's one constraint, and that would be local funding. The other constraint we face, and we face even with our current 3-tier system, is we are not able to attract the number of bus drivers that we need.
You're leading me right into my next question of what is our current or most recent number of vacancies for full-time drivers?
I didn't come prepared with that tonight, but I'd say we're in the low 700 range, and to get to the point where we would like to be and not have to rely on substitutes would be at least 100 to 120 drivers. But again, those are back of the envelope numbers. I can certainly get you accurate to-date numbers.
So approximately 100 drivers, give or take,
yes,
a few here or there, and that's with 50 full-time subs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can get back to us on that, Mr. Nieder. Ms. Hartenstein.
Mr. Nieder, if there's any, well, let me back up. At Northridge, they have a real robust before and after school care that's been in place for years. And it also, I spent some time there, and I was impressed with the fact that they use so many teachers and TAs to run the program, which means a lack of employment if there is no before or after school care for next year. And because it really does serve a need there, I would encourage us to look at any possible way. How creative could we be in order to continue the before school care? Maybe the after school, due to the time, would not be used as much, but if there's any way we could possibly have that happen, to work with the school to make that happen. I understand the change in the time, but the child care piece is important to the staff that's there. So anything we can do to help support that, I would appreciate that.
Ms. Moore and I will absolutely look into both your concern and Ms. Cash's concern. Yeah. And again, the time change is one thing. The facility change may be creating other implications, but let us gather some information.
Yes, see if there's anything we can do.
Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. I wanted to add to Ms. Mahaffey's comments that students are also very vocal about bell schedules. I got a stack of letters from Martin Middle School students asking me why we don't start at 8:30 that knows for all schools. And so I'm looking forward to writing about 25 letters back to these kids, giving them that similar answer. I think it was $112 million when we asked that question of additional funding, and then with the added lack of drivers, it's a frustrating predicament. But one thing that Durham and Guilford have done as a district is flip their high schools to be earlier, and their high schools to be later, and their elementary schools to be earlier. And I think, and I am also hearing from a lot of parents who are looking at those districts and looking at outcomes. So I think as a board and community, we need to take time to see how that is playing out in those districts. And again, the idea of changing everyone's bell schedule, which that would entail, is formidable as well. So just raising more questions as we vote on this. But those are things out in the community that I think we need to be talking and thinking about.
I'll get my letter sent to Ms. Cash, who represent the schools that I go to, and one from your school. And I can have you do my homework. I also have a stack of those letters, too. I did not write them.
I think they're going to get the same letter, yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. I will indeed echo the sentiments of Ms. Cash, Ms. Hartenstein, having been a wonderful recipient of the robust before and after care. And clearly, my family would like to say they'd be interested in a change of bell schedules, too. But we also recognize the difficulty, but I think it's important that the public know that these are conversations that we're having internally, and to Ms. Kushner's point, we are receiving our students' feedback as well. Seeing no other discussion? All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, K-3 legislated class size implementation plan.
Calendars?
Calendars, sorry.
I'll just save the
I mean,
best
you don't
for
have to
last.
sound so mean about it.
It all sounded helpful, but in math.
Chair Johnson, Hostler, Superintendent Burns, and board members, I'm bringing this evening the instructional calendars. Here he goes. I've been sitting here listening.
Don't worry, I grant a lot of grace, Ms. Moore.
Instructional calendars for traditional multi-track year-round and modified schools for the 2019-20 school year. We had a number of work sessions and opportunities to review different drafts and options. A couple of changes to note in the calendar. We are moving to 177 days and still maintaining 1,025 hours of instruction. That change provides us greater flexibility within the calendar to do some things that are responsive to requests that we've had from schools, primarily to include more teacher work days, full teacher work days for teachers to have time to plan and work together in schools, eliminating the use of early release days, which had some questionable feedback from a number of different stakeholder groups when we reached out, and then to also, which also the additional teacher work days and all of that still does provide, it also provides more days and opportunities for weather makeup, but this calendar does also continue to provide, and we have verified with schools, continuing practice that we've had in the past of having 3 days worth of bank time available should the need arise. One final note that I would make is that all of the calendars do include a statement at the bottom regarding the superintendent's ability in accordance with the North Carolina calendar law to make changes to that calendar if necessary. And he would do so, the superintendent would do so in consultation with the board. You would certainly be aware of that if any changes were going to be proposed. And we are requesting approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Sun.
Move that we approve the request for instruction calendars for the 1920 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, please know by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you will remain.
Okay. The next item is we are requesting board approval of the K-3 legislated class size implementation plan for the Wake County Public School System. The board received information on the K-3 impact presentation at a previous meeting regarding an implementation plan that we were suggesting. The plan focuses on the impacts on facility use, teacher allotments and staffing needs, and then recruitment efforts. We have in the plan, we've outlined immediate options and needs that schools will have accessible to them. Intermediate options that may require a little longer to implement and would require some review, some longer term options that would require additional development, and then a process that would allow the board to understand exactly where the status is with all of our schools when they go over, understanding what the fix will be whenever a class size does go over. We'll be working to provide that information to the board on a regular basis to be in compliance with what the legislation asks us to do. We know that we are not recommending a uniform solution for all schools, but we are providing guidance to schools about the order in which to make some of the changes in their schools. One of the things that we did in this plan, based on feedback from schools as well as the board, is to try to protect art, music, those types of enhancement spaces and the magnet program enhancement spaces, so that those are the last options that schools would consider. And in the event that a school gets to the point of needing to consider those spaces for a regular K-3 class, we would have a process in place for review and approval of that. Happy to answer any questions. We are requesting board approval.
Move to approve the K-3 class size implementation plan. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? Ms. Kushner.
I feel like we've been talking about this a long time, so I don't know whether questions. I just wanted to thank Ms. Moore and her staff for continuing to look at options so that there's not just one uniform cookie-cutter solution. So I appreciate that, how deeply the staff and this board have gone diving to make sure that we're allowing schools to make the best decision for their school of a difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we vote?
Yes, we will need to. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move to go into closed session to consider confidential personal information protected under GS 143-218.11, A1, A3, and A6, and 115C-219, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-218.11, A3, due to current litigation, Rodney Johnson versus Wake County Board of Education, Wake County case number 18, CVS 1948, Joseph Shields and Laura Shields individually, and as GAL for Raleigh Shields, a minor, versus Wake County Board of Education, Dr. Kerry Chisnall and Marilyn Ann Guys, Wake County case number 17, CVS 003089, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the board in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the board, and to consult with and instruct board staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the board on the particulars of the acquisition of real property for public improvements related to the East Wake Middle School site, and to receive the board's instructions as to the position to be taken on behalf of the board in negotiations in relation thereto, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We will now go into closed session.